Heavy rains are expected to fall in a few weeks. Aid agencies are racing to shore up flimsy shelters and stabilize shaky terrain before the monsoon season begins. The UN Refugee Agency says the work ahead is monumental, but preparations are off to a better start this year than last. Aid agencies last year had to deal with the massive influx of more than 740,000 Rohingya refugees fleeing violence and persecution in Myanmar. They arrived over a period of a few months, straining local resources and requiring vast amounts of humanitarian assistance.
In an effort to encourage the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, to dismantle its nuclear weapons program, the United Nations Security Council last year passed Resolution 2375, which imposes sanctions on North Korea. The United States is determined to strictly implement this resolution. Members of the UN Security Council, and by extension all UN member states, have unanimously agreed to fully enforce sanctions on North Korea, and we expect them to continue to honor those commitments, said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Ties waited Monday for the results of an election called a return to democratic rule, but which has been widely criticized as an exercise designed by Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to entrench his military stranglehold on power. Preliminary official results released late Sunday showed that with 93% of the ballots counted, the military-backed Phalang Parachut Party was in the lead with about 7.6 million votes. That's short of what would be needed for a majority in parliament. In second place was the Pheu Thai Party of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra with 7.1 million votes. The campaign was marred by allegations of vote buying. However, complaints were few on polling day, with election observers from Australia, Canada, the United States, and the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations on hand.
The enduring defeat of ISIS remains a top priority for the United States. The U.S.-led global coalition to defeat ISIS is leading stabilization efforts that consolidate military gains, restore basic essential services, and enable Syrians to voluntarily and safely return to their homes in Raqqa and other former ISIS strongholds. Assistance includes explosive hazard and rubble removal, providing clean water, rehabilitating electricity networks, and other basic necessities. Since April, the United States has elicited approximately $300 million in contributions and pledges from coalition partners to support immediate stabilization and early recovery initiatives in areas liberated from ISIS in northeast Syria.
President Trump has reluctantly signed into law a congressional bill imposing sanctions on Russia over its policy in Ukraine and alleged meddling in last year's US presidential election. Afterwards, he called the legislation seriously flawed, saying it encroached on his powers to negotiate foreign policy and hurt the interests of European allies. The company that provided the Venezuelan voting system for the controversial Constituent Assembly elections says the turnout figure was inflated by at least 1 million. The Speaker of the opposition-controlled National Assembly called on prosecutors to open a criminal investigation immediately.
An economist sees the world basically through a typical microeconomic toolkit. That involves things like thinking at the margin, rationality, opportunity cost, trade-offs. Economists, like any other discipline, rules, and its own way of seeing the world. So basically economics, or economists, in general, tend to apply microeconomic concepts like that to explain the way humans behave and to make predictions about the future.
Brooke and her colleague Mark Newman studied who swapped messages with whom on a popular online dating platform in the month of January 2014. They categorized users by desirability using PageRank, one of the algorithms behind search technology. Essentially, if you receive a dozen messages from desirable users, you must be more desirable than someone who receives the same number of messages from average users. And then they asked, how far out of their league do online daters tend to go when pursuing a partner?
I think people are optimistic realists.
In other words, they found that both men and women tended to pursue mates just 25% more desirable than themselves.
So they're being optimistic, but they're also taking into account their own relative position within this overall desirability hierarchy.
And the study did have a few more lessons for people on the market.
I think one of the take-home messages from the study is women could probably afford to be more aspirational in their mate pursuit.
For many years, the favorite horror story about abrupt climate change was that a shift in ocean currents could radically cool Europe's climate. These currents, called the overturning circulation, bring warm water and warm temperatures north from the equator to Europe. Susan Lozier, an oceanographer at Duke University, says scientists have long worried that this ocean circulation could be disrupted.
That brings us to the CEO's second duty, building everyone, or more accurately, building the senior team. All the executives report to the CEO, so it's the CEO's job to hire, fire and manage the executive team. From coaching CEOs, I actually think this is the most important skill of all. Because when a CEO hires an excellent senior team, that team can keep the company running. When a CEO hires a poor senior team, the CEO is up to spending all of their time trying to do with the team, and not nearly enough time trying to do with other elements of their job. The senior team can and often does develop the strategy for the company, but ultimately it's always the CEO who has the final go-no-go decision on strategy. Those of you who've never heard the term Neo-Latin may be forgiven for thinking it's a new South American dance craze. If you're puzzled when I tell you it has something to do with the language of Romans, take heart. Over the years, many classes who have confessed they are not really sure what it is either. Some have assumed that they are so-called Late Latin, written at the end of the Roman Empire. Others have supposed it must have something to do with the Middle Ages. Or perhaps it's that pseudo-Latin which my 5- and 7-year-old boys seem to have gleaned from the Harry Potter books, useful for spells and curses that they zip one another with makeshift paper ash ones. No, in fact, Neo-Latin is more or less the same as the Latin that was written in the ancient world, Classical Latin. So, what's so new about it? Candace Galen is based at the University of Missouri, in Columbia. And, being a biologist, she thought, why not use this astronomical phenomenon to study a biological one? Specifically, as the skies darkened would daytime pollinators, like bumblebees and honeybees, call it quits? What better activity during an eclipse than to go out with a recorder and record the bees? So Galen asked 400 citizen scientists including young students, to place audio recorders in 16 flower patches along the path of totality, in Oregon, Idaho, and Missouri. When they analyzed the audio, they found that during partial eclipse, bee buzzing continued. But when totality hit, the bees went silent and only the conversational buzz of human observers could be heard. Then, as the moon passed and the sun again lit up the sky, the bees regained their buzz. If you're a senior citizen, music in the background may be distracting. But for younger people, experts at multitasking, it's apparently no big deal. That's according to a study in the journal Gerontologist. Researchers recruited 103 people, half between the ages of 18 and 30, the others between 60 and 75. The volunteers then took part in memorization exercises and a drill where they had to quickly match a photo of a face with the same face in an array of unfamiliar faces. Some participants did the exercises in silence. Others performed the tasks while listening to white noise or instrumental jazz, blues, classical and electronic music. Across age groups, the consensus was that the background sound was distracting, but only older people's performance suffered when the noise was present. For example, older folks who did the face matching with music playing remembered 10% fewer faces. The result matches up with the theory that the elderly are less able to filter out what's called distracting task-irrelevant information. In this case, the distracting info might have interfered with them storing the facial image in the first place, much less impeding their ability to remember it a short while later.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with India's Foreign Secretary in Washington Monday and told him that the United States stands with India in fighting terrorism. After their meeting, the State Department said the two discussed the importance of bringing to justice those responsible for a suicide attack on an Indian paramilitary convoy claimed by Pakistan-based militants. The State Department said the diplomats spoke of the urgency of Pakistan taking meaningful action against terrorist groups operating on its soil. Last month, a suicide bomber killed 40 Indian paramilitary troops in a convoy in the disputed Kashmir region. A Pakistan-based militant group claimed responsibility for that violence. New Delhi has vowed to punish Islamabad for sheltering the militants, saying the Indian Army chief has been given a free hand to take whatever action is required.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christy Nicholson. Got a minute?
One day the banana is perfect, bright yellow, firm, flavorful. But even within that same day, brown spots can appear on your perfectly ripe banana, and its flesh turns mushy, and it's destined for the compost or, at best, banana bread. But scientists are developing a way to extend the life of ripe bananas. It's a spray-on coating made from chitosan, a substance found in crab and shrimp shells. The new gel can be sprayed on bananas to slow the ripening process by up to 12 days. Like other fruit, bananas remain alive after being picked, and they actually continue to respire. This means that they take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. The more the banana breathes, the faster it ripens, and then rots. Bananas ripen more quickly than most fruit because they don't naturally slow the respiration after being picked. In fact, it speeds up, causing bananas to become mushy. Chitosan not only kills the bacteria on banana skin that then leads to rot, it also significantly slows down the respiration in the first place. So bananas won't drive you bananas.
Thanks for the minute. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christy Nicholson.
Ronald Cotton went to prison for rape. The victim picked him from a lineup, convinced she was accurate. She picked him again years later when his case was reopened. This second lineup included the actual rapist. After 11 years behind bars, Cotton was later exonerated by DNA evidence. Experts say that the current lineup format pressures witnesses to identify a suspect even when they lack confidence. So researchers are trying to improve the accuracy of such identifications. One recent study had more than 900 participants watch a short film of a staged crime. Up to a week after watching the film, the viewers looked at photos of suspects, one at a time, and rated how confident they were about each one's guilt. Half of the participants could take as long as they wanted to look at the photos. The other half had to decide within a few seconds. And this fast group was up to 66% more accurate. The study is in the Journal of Psychological Science.
Strong memories are accessed more quickly than weak memories, which may explain why choosing fast tends to mean choosing right. Another factor that's putting the standard police lineup itself on trial.
Our Milky Way galaxy has two large satellite galaxies orbiting it. They're known as the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds, and humans have been aware of the existence of these celestial objects for at least a millennium. Recently, researchers were curious about whether our configuration is fairly typical or an astronomical anomaly. In other words, is our corner of the cosmos ordinary? Now a new study finds that the Milky Way and its companion galaxies are an unusual combination, but they're not one of a kind. Astronomers in the UK and Australia looked at thousands of galaxies to try to find an analog of our arrangement. The search turned up two close replicas, each with a Milky Way-like galaxy, accompanied by two galaxies comparable to the Magellanic Clouds. But the researchers also concluded that such arrangements are pretty rare. Only 0.5% of Milky Way-like galaxies have companions like ours. The Magellanic Clouds may be transitory features. In a few billion years, the Milky Way may absorb them completely. So someday, our corner of the cosmos could be pretty ordinary after all.
What we're bringing for our users is basically an immersive experience of a huge portion of the NASA Kennedy Space Center facility.
Ryan Failer, project manager of Google Street View. In honor of the center's 50th anniversary, Street View is adding more than 6,000 images of the Space Center, the starting point for Apollo and Space Shuttle missions.
So you can go into the facility, you can go into some of the large areas there, like the vehicle assembly building. You can go down to the launch pad and actually go up several floors of the launch pad and see where the astronauts would walk and where they would go as they were boarding the shuttle.
The shuttle is now a thing of the past, but someday Kennedy will host a new generation of spacecraft.
So when we were there, we actually got to take a snapshot of these structures and these systems in place, before all those transitions happened, right? And many of those facilities are going to be decommissioned or converted to different uses. The opportunity to kind of capture that moment in Street View and preserve it, make it accessible to people around the world is I think, really valuable and important.
When you don't clean your plate, microbes feast. And Americans are awfully good at feeding microbes, wasting some 222 million metric tons of food every year. That's a quarter of our food. Much of that wasted food ends up in garbage dumps, turned by microbes into methane, a powerful greenhouse gas and one of the primary culprits behind global warming. Now, government officials in Massachusetts would like to ensure that restaurants, universities, hospitals, and other large institutions don't exacerbate that problem. The idea is to make sure all that wasted food doesn't end up in landfills, but instead becomes either compost or energy. The same microbes that turn food into methane in a landfill can turn food into methane in a biodigester, and that methane can then be used as a fuel. More importantly, from the Bay State's perspective, it will keep the state's landfills from filling up. Of course, the methane from landfills can also be harvested, and often is. And as the Pilgrims knew, it would be even smarter not to waste the food in the first place. But let's give thanks for another helping of new ways to curb climate change.
It's a given that most babies wear diapers, in Western cultures anyway, but diapers may trap more than waste. They may also confine a baby's ability to walk. Scientists compared the walking gaits of 60 babies who were either naked, wore a thin disposable diaper, or a thick cloth diaper. Half the babies were 13-month-old novice walkers and the other half 19-month-old experienced walkers. When the 13-month-olds walked naked, only 10 fell. But while wearing the cloth diaper, 21 of them fell, and while wearing the disposable, 17 of them fell. Among the 19-month-olds, only 4 fell while naked or wearing disposables, while 8 fell while wearing cloth diapers. But both age groups took wider and shorter steps while wearing diapers, as opposed to walking naked. The research is in the journal Developmental Science. The study can't predict if wearing diapers has a long-term impact. Nonetheless, the researchers believe walking naked would speed up walking development. But then we are left with the issue of covering the entire house in plastic and relying heavily on the child's ability to communicate his or her elimination intentions.
Some ecotourism offers visitors close encounters with different species, but new research suggests that these activities may not be so great for the animals. Researchers tagged stingrays in Stingray City in the Cayman Islands to monitor their movements and behavior. Compared to stingrays outside of the tourism area, those in Stingray City switched their activity patterns from night to day when tourists handed out food, and mated year-round instead of seasonally. The stingrays also had more bite marks, which suggests increased aggression towards one another. The study is in the journal PLOS ONE. past research has found increased stress and more intra- and interspecies aggression among animals that have been fed by humans. Interactive tourism is a growing business, but researchers say that more study is needed to ensure the health and safety of humans and animals alike. Ecotourism may be good for a given species as humans become engaged in its survival, but for the individual members of that species tasked with dealing with people, it may not be a walk in the park.